Welcome back to another episode with Fight Night Picks. As always, we're brought to you by SimBody. Vertiball is now SimBody. If you head on over to their website, simbody.com, you're going to get all the great products that you know and love, including the SimBody Vertiroller and the Vertiball that you have seen most likely here in studio. Look at that. Place it, lock it, attach it, Vertiball, all sorts of great stuff over there if you want to roll out those old tired muscles and you don't want to go with that old lacrosse ball. They're also coming out with that very new product that you can see right in front of you. And if I head on over to my cart, look at that. I've already got a Vertiball over there. Little bit of a deal right there. And if you hit the try for 60 days risk-free, use the promo code FNP and you're going to get 10% off your order. With that code FNP at simbody.com, you're really helping out another local company here in New Brunswick, Canada. Can't wait for it. The new name, SimBody at simbody.com. And as we always say, let's get into it.
A last look at the big card. Be sure to head into the chat and have your say. Let's get into it and join in Fight Night Picks ? Kicks.
And just like that, we're back in action, getting set for UFC Vegas 80, headlined by Grant Dawson taking on Bobby Green. Make sure you hit up the big old poll over there in the chat. As always, one half of your host duo, Craig Allen, Twitter and Instagram at MattAllenFNP. With me to your left, to my right, my left, your right. Whoa, got my corners mixed up. The sides. I'm speaking too much French. Matt Allen, the biggest Dennis Schroeder fan that's out there. Now, Matt, when we look at this card, everybody's kind of going back and forth over there in the chat as to whether or not it's a good card or not. Now, Branch above it said it's a solid B. I said there's some pay-per-view cards that are fringe B, if that. It is a decent card, and we said that at the start of the week to really kind of get things going. There's only 3 ranked fighters. All of them 10 or below, so you don't have any top 10 fighters on this card unless you count 10 as top 10, and that'd be fair play to you. But when you do look at it overall, I mean, Dawson taking on the unranked Bobby Green, that win streak for Dawson apparently is just not enough. So for Bobby Green, finally gets an opportunity at a big-time main event on a lot of notice. His last time out in a 5-round atmosphere, 9 days against the former champ, or the current champ, sorry, Islam Makhachev. It was a TKO loss in that one. I might have misspoke and said submission at the start of the week. I knew what I meant, but you didn't because I didn't say it the right way. So when we do look at this one overall, Matt, no rookies, one sophomore showing, and that is Matheus Mendonca, a little bit lower on the card, taking on Nate Maness. A very interesting one. A couple of big-time bantamweights competing at flyweight. So, overall, again, branch above, Steven C., Al the Pal, or is it AI the Pal, loving the D-backs. Matt, the Phillies, they're taking on the Braves today.
It's going to be a great series.
They're big underdogs, but I like that game. Bub Collins hitting up the super chat. Great to have the Allens back. Smash that
Great to have
like.
you back, Bub Collins.
Smash that like, if you will. We got Trovelin tuning in. Morono versus Buckley is one of those hardcore fights. Going to be pure violence.
I was thinking about it a little bit more during this week. Do you know what I like about this main event? It really is like every other Bobby Green fight we have, right? We talk about this a lot with a fighter in Jim Miller, right? It's, hey, every time you beat Jim Miller, good things are going to happen to you, right? And for Bobby Green, he is in that position, but I'd say even higher up on the card and in the division. If you beat Bobby Green, you're probably going to go out there and fight a really high-level guy next, probably even a ranked contender. So it's just like all those other fights for Green, right? Grant Dawson's kind of that up-and-coming, trying to prove himself. He wants those bigger names in the division, but we are going to get the fight more catered to Bobby Green's style. He has great volume. He does have good output. I do think the 5 rounds might favor him if he's able to get past some of those initial takedown attempts. So I like it because it is a little bit reminiscent of most of other Bobby Green's fights, but it is just at a much higher profile.
And to make the Bobby Green comparison, we just look at this main event. Grant Dawson, everybody thinks back a few fights ago. You got that kind of Spider-Man meme in the hallways. The Grant Dawson fight against Rick Glenn in the 3rd round of their matchup. Dawson was just exhausted. And then we think back to Bobby Green, round 3 against Fiziev. Fiziev's gone on to do some pretty great things. Obviously injured his knees last time out against Gamrot. And today announced that Gamrot is going to be the backup fighter to Oliveira Makhachev 2 at UFC 294. So that's pretty cool stuff. But if you know Fight Night Picks and you know question mark kicks, we always start at the bottom of the card. We make our way up to the top. Started from the bottom, now we're here. New Drake album. I listened to it today. There's
some good songs. There's a couple.
It feels like he's just mailing it in with a lot of these albums.
I like the J. Cole song, but I like J. Cole quite a bit.
I like the J. Cole song too. All right, Matt, a fight that I like.
And this,
Kinda.
Let me jump in really quick. This is one of those fights, though, that does kind of speak to what we were talking about with this, which is this is a bit of a surprisingly deep card, right? Montana De La Rosa and JJ Aldrich aren't going to be fighting for the title anytime soon. I think we can all agree to that much, but these are two fairly recognizable fighters if you do watch every single card, and if you're watching our stuff, you probably watch every single card, and they have been in somewhat, maybe not high-profile matchups, but important fights in this division. I know we both said at the start of the week, this might be one of those loser leaves town because they have had so many of those recognizable fights and matchups. They haven't necessarily come out on the winning side in a lot of those matchups, so it is an oddly important fight that is the opener for this fight night card, because if Aldrich is able to beat Montana De La Rosa, she's probably not getting a ranked contender next. She's probably going to have to fight another prospect trying to make their name off of her, but it is going to give her another chance to extend her own streak, and I do think that's going to be important.
And we differed on the pick in this one. This is a very diluted version of your main event. For Montana De La Rosa, strike to get the takedown. Once she gets it down in the mat, she's going to look to control. She was an All-American in high school with the wrestling, got into MMA very young off of that high school background. She ended up onto the Ultimate Fighter at flyweight, lost to some big-time fighters, well, the biggest one, namely the champ, Nico Montano. And for JJ Aldrich, she came in off the Ultimate Fighter as well, down to strawweight, lost to Tatiana Suarez. Water off a duck's back for both of these women in the Suarez loss column. But if you look at both of them, for Montana De La Rosa, since COVID and the inception of the UFC Apex cards, which we have this weekend, she's only fought on Apex shows, because people don't line up to pay for tickets to watch Montana De La Rosa fight. And in those Apex fights, that is her 5 on in. She's 1-3-1. Obviously, the one was a draw against Maida Buena Silva.
So she's like Chuck Palumbo, doing a lot of house shows, not a lot of the main events on TV.
Lost a point in that one. And for JJ Aldrich, she fought on a string of Apex cards. She went 3-2 before she kind of was able to break out of it. And then if you look at it, her last time out, a big-time second-round win over Liang Na. Liang Na. Got a feeling we're not going to hear about Liang Na in the UFC
Probably
much
not.
longer. 3 fights, 3 losses, all of them awful. So when we look at this one, at Fight Night Picks, I was surprised to see in our Instagram story the votes on this one. 59% going with De La Rosa, 41% going with the Dean of Mean, not Keith Jardine. Give JJ Aldrich that nickname. Going to just that big time finish. Her last finish win was in 2016 for JJ Aldrich, so it had been a meaningful amount of time. She got it done. She's a plus 125 underdog in this one. Again, you got a fighter coming off of a finish win over a warm body, and you got Montana De La Rosa on a losing streak. Matt, the fans like De La Rosa in this one, but I know we were split on this pick, and it's no secret that you had JJ Aldrich.
Again, I don't think she's going to defend every single takedown. Don't get me wrong. She's going to have to fight at least some fight, or at least some portion of this fight off her back. But I do think she's going to be able to be sound enough defensively to avoid some of the bigger actions of a fighter like De La Rosa. And on the feet, De La Rosa is not the most complete fighter with her own boxing. It is very basic the way that she does set up her entries for her own takedown attempts. And we've seen her been damaged before on the feet by fighters in the past, especially that Lee fight. Like, Andrea Lee was doing a great job off the back foot, landing really clean combinations down the middle. And I know Aldrich isn't the same kind of striker, right? She doesn't have the same kind of range, but she can also land really heavy shots on the inside. I know she's not going out there getting a lot of knockouts, but she does land damaging shots, and I do think that is important to bring up. So for that reason, I have Aldrich, but it really does come down to how strong is her takedown defense in this matchup, because if she just keeps on getting chain takedowns over and over again against her, she's going to lose this fight.
Chad Toredo saying, where's Sean O'Malley from? Montana. He's from Montana. Dylan saying, just bet against the hot one. Works every time with chicks. No, it doesn't. And when you do look at this one, I mean, Brandor brings up a good one. Just skip it. Make it a pop and popcorn fight. I like De La Rosa with the takedowns. Again, for Liang Na, it was 3 scarf hold attempts in a row. She got 2 of the first 3. Then she was able to kind of mix and then change her levels for an awesome double leg. She got reversed, Aldrich on top, and that was it for Liang Na. I like Montana De La Rosa in the matchup, but the scary thing about this fight, if you're trying to make a pick and you can Nelson Muntz your way to a ha-ha at one of us after the fact, JJ Aldrich has always been a good striker going in all 4 directions. Backwards, forwards, side to side. Her takedown defense, 65% in the UFC over a pretty long clip. But if you look at it for Montana De La Rosa, she has switched gyms. I mean, obviously originated in Texas, trained a little bit in Colorado. Seems like from her Instagram, she's back in Texas with Mark. But when I look at Montana De La Rosa, I haven't seen a progression really in the skills at all. It's just that one knife is so darn sharp that she goes with it every single time. So I'll go with De La Rosa here, but I don't feel comfortable with it at all because Aldrich can really kind of just Death by 1,000 paper cuts.
Just be
her
steady,
style.
exactly.
That's it, exactly. So we move into the next matchup, Matt. Aoriqileng is taking on Johnny Munoz Jr. I think we're split on this one as well. For Aoriqileng, his last time out, he got dropped and finished by Amin Zahabi. You know, that old bantamweight, the guy that fights once in a blue moon. He's been active, though, more often than not lately. But Amin Zahabi getting the win over Aoriqileng. And they did a little bit of a late week shuffle with some of these fights. Originally, the second fight that they had on the card was Maness Mendonca. If you go to UFC stats, they still have that as the matchup. But if you look at the graphic that they put out today, this is the second fight. So these two guys at bantamweight, Matt, it is a clash of styles, just like that first fight. Aoriqileng, you kind of touched on it. If you go back and watch his fights with WLF Wars, he was a bantamweight champ over there. He'd mixed in his striking with his wrestling. In the UFC, we've seen just a little bit of a flicker of that wrestling, but more often than not, he's been a zombie that's been biting down on the mouthpiece, willing and miting his way to some of these fights and some of these kind of comebacks. And listen, it's been a lot of comebacks for Aoriqileng. Taking on Johnny Munoz Jr., Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, has low accuracy takedowns, has low accuracy volume striking, but when Munoz is able to fight wrestlers, he tends to kind of wear them out, and get his submissions. We saw that the win over Jamie Simmons. We've also seen where he gets him tight and things get a little bit fast and loose. His last fight out, he's pulling guard. And Daniel Santos, who I saw, Willie Cat, out of his upcoming fight coming up here. I think it was a UFC 294 he's supposed to fight. But if you look at it for Munoz Jr., that fight, the fight against Tony Gravely, where the hands drop, the chin's up, and he gets hit by that in-tight shot.
And that's the thing about Munoz. We're not saying he isn't skilled by any means, because he does have a lot of skills at his disposal and in the arsenal. It's just a matter of finally putting them all together, because if he did have better accuracy on some of those shots in the feet, he would be maybe a lethal fighter is a step too far, but he'd be a much more complete one at that. And he would be able to blend together probably the wrestling a little bit more, because he'd be that much closer to his opponent, and then that would help him set up his own grappling, which we know is quite high level. So for Munoz, it's just a, hey, I'll believe in it once I finally do see the totality of it all. Because again, I think he's a very skilled fighter, but it's, can he fight up to the potential of that full skill set? And for Aoriqileng, I think it's going to come down to what his fight IQ is in this matchup, because let's say he does go for an ill-advised takedown attempt, right? He's having success in the feed. He's got Johnny Munoz up against the cage, and maybe he does kind of pull a Kelvin Gastelum against Israel Adesanya, land a couple shots and go in for that double leg. If he does something like that, I could see him get choked out with a guillotine or with some kind of a defensive submission from a Johnny Munoz Jr., but that's the thing.
Is Johnny Munoz Jr., this is the weirdest comparison. There's people out there that I'm either going to lose them or I'm going to gain some points out there, internet points. Do you think Johnny Munoz Jr., because the Tony Gravely comp is there, is he all of a sudden Simon Oliveira, bantamweight front choke specialist?
He could be, and I do think that would be a good path for him to win this fight. I just think defensive submissions will be key, because if he feels uncomfortable on the feet, I don't know if he has that go for broke style in the back pocket. You know, like if he is down 2 rounds, is he going to really be able to bite down on the mouthpiece, move forward, and completely change up his style? Maybe he can, but again, until I am able to see that full side of his skill set, I just think Aoriqileng is going to be the guy who's a little bit more steady, especially on the feet. If he's able to shoot a couple takedown attempts, I do worry about him getting finished, but I still think he can land some bigger power shots.
Now, we were split on the pick. This sounds different here, Matt. You had Munoz at the start of the week. I had Aoriqileng. If we have a look over on Topology, I just want to get an idea of where the fans are. Obviously, let us know in the comments section who you have in the matchup, but Johnny Munoz Jr., I mean, listen, it's been a little bit of a tricky ride. Lose to Santos, beat Ludwig Cholignan, put that 3-round pressure on him.
The more I think about it, it goes back to a rule that I like to go to. You're either going to win the fight or you're going to lose the fight by trying to win. I know that sounds very basic, but for Aoriqileng, if he loses the fight, it's because he's trying to be too aggressive, which is honestly something I think can get him the win in this matchup. If he really is in Johnny Munoz's face, making him uncomfortable with some of the strikes. So the more I think about it, I'm going to do a very rare switch of the pick for me, and I'm going to go Aoriqileng.
63% of the fans over on Topology, I'll get you the vote total there because I just memorized the number. 3,263 total votes, 63% of them going with Johnny Munoz Jr. And it sucks because for Aoriqileng, his teammate, Alateng Lee, stepping in on short notice. He's going to be taking on Chris Gutierrez. I made a whole weird video about Conway Twitty.
I felt uncomfortable.
And Montel Jackson and Chris Gutierrez. But awesome for Alateng Lee. I have Aoriqileng in the matchup, but really eager to see what the fans think of this one. Because for Munoz, if he can pressure, if he can throw that out there. I mean,
It's
listen,
a lot.
Going out there with that Marina Moroz and Johnny Munoz Jr.
It's just that, like, wipeout wall, with all the boxing gloves in it where you gotta walk by. Shout out wipeout.
All right, Matt, we move into the next matchup, the long-awaited return, a little bit over 2 years on the shelf. Kanako Murata grew the hair out, got some highlights, looking fresh out there on the scales, and Murata off of that dislocated left elbow. That's kind of left her sideline. And again, I talk about this sometimes, and I feel like it just kind of goes over the head of a lot of people, but red corner, blue corner, sometimes it can be viewed as A side. Usually it's a fighter that's either on the win streak or that's ranked.
Or a home. They do it for hometown fighters.
Ends up in the red corner. But the last time we saw Murata, it was at the UFC's Apex. She was off of one win over Randa Marcos in the UFC, and she was the red corner against the blue corner, the ranked fighter, Vina Jandiroba, who's in the top 10 right now. So for Murata, it was disappointing in more ways than one. She got caught in that armbar that ended up kind of messing up the elbow. But she also got kind of walked, and she had a big kind of goose egg over her right eye. She struggled in all of the striking exchanges. She couldn't figure out any of those. Just every so often, Vina maybe toss a little kick in there, throw that right hand, throw that right hand, throw that right hand. And Vina kept going to the well with the right hand, and she had a ton of success. And when you look at a matchup like this, Vanessa Demopoulos can sometimes accept the bottom position because of how good her jiu-jitsu is in some of her matchups. We know with Demopoulos that she will throw the absolute kitchen sink at you on the feet. You saw that against Maria Oliveira, where she was able to drop her in the second round of their matchup, land some really good ground and pound. In the third round, Maria rallied back in that one, if you remember. But when you look at this one, again, I'm eager to see what people are thinking. Brandor, does Demopoulos get cut if she loses this? Probably not. Probably not. I don't think she will.
She's like 35, 36.
She's 35 right now, but I mean, again, she's one of those marketable names that they try and keep around. She's
Craig, you know what I'm gonna say.
Matt,
no one's
Matt,
ever canceled their plans.
Matt, Ashley Yoder has a fight coming up in the UFC. If that can be true, then the little monster
Ashley
sticks
Yoder's
around.
fought like Angela Hill and fought pretty good fighters and been on a poster in the past. Vanessa Demopoulos has been on the Fight Night prelims every single fight she's ever had.
She's got a performance bonus.
That's amazing. I'm really happy for her. No one in the grand scheme of things is really like canceling anything for this fight.
Yoder's taking on Emily Ducati next week. Big fight. 8-8 versus 12-8.
I have Kanako Murata in this fight, and it really does come down to how strong she is in that top position.
Almost dropped my water on my laptop.
A catastrophic thing right there. I just think her top position is going to be able to be dominant enough and just be positionally aware enough to not get caught in any of the tricky submissions off the back. Again, I don't think this fight is going to be the most aesthetically pleasing because it is going to come down to Murata just being really heavy in that top position, probably not taking a lot of risks. But you normally win the fight from the top position and not the bottom position.
At Fight Night Picks over on Instagram, you guys voted on the story poll. 66% of the fans going with Murata to get the win. Brandor, Demopoulos was in Joe Rogan's arms. It's the same picture in everybody's minds. Demopoulos in Joe Rogan's arms after jumping, and Emil Weber-Mech jumping up in the air at Venator. Matt, you think people think of Venator as much as I do?
No.
Probably not. All right, Matt, we move into the next matchup, and somehow he did it. The man with the most pearly whites next to his teammate, Charles Oliveira. I'm talking Matheus Mendonca. 1,000-yard stare when he was on the scale, but those pearly whites are pearly white and then some. Mendonca, his first time as a pro and amateur making the flyweight limit. Nate Maness also on the scales. Didn't look terrible. I mean, but for Maness, and I mentioned at the start of the week, he did an interview with James Lynch, and it's pretty much an 8-week cut for him to get down. It's really, really scheduled. Mendonca, the first time. If you look at both these guys, Matt, Nate Maness, I trust him in the second round and the third round. I do. Because I've seen him get blitzed in the first round, and other than his last fight against Tagir Ulanbekov, for the most part, Maness is able to rally through. We touched on that with a fighter earlier on in this card, but Maness is that same type. And you saw it against Tony Gravely and Luke Sanders for those big-time wins that he has. When you look at it for Maness' last two fights out, Umar Nurmagomedov, top bantamweight prospect, if you can still call him a prospect, and former Fight Nights Global brand ambassador? Tagir Ulanbekov. So you look at it for Maness in this one, he struggled in the grappling with both of those guys. Now you're taking on a guy that will wrestle, and he'll power some of those takedowns against you. But when you look at a guy like Mendonca, he lives fast and loose. He's a guy that carries a bottle of Tapatio in his back pocket and tries to impress his friends. Look at this. I got it at the Dollar Tree. I like it. I drink it, bud. I love those vinegar-based sauces. So when you look at a guy like Mendonca, Matt, I worry about him a lot in this fight, and he is a pretty decent-sized favorite. I don't know. I got to see him beat Nate Maness to beat anybody in this top 15, anybody in and around. But this is a tough fight for Mendonca at the same time.
So a couple of things. I thought both guys looked a little drained. I agree with Clay 100%. I thought both guys looked quite drained, but they are both big for the division in different ways, right? Like Maness is a very large frame, so it's probably just difficult for him, whereas Mendonca is quite bodied up, so I'm assuming that weight cut is quite difficult as well. But the thing about Maness is, can he get to the second and third round before he is able to take over and have a lot of success? And even the second round might still be competitive if Mendonca isn't just completely blitzing and throwing everything at him early. Because Maness does have one of those games where it takes him a little bit of time to warm up, but once he is going downhill, he's a very difficult fighter to deal with. He's got complete striking, very good grappler as well. I just don't like the way he stiffens up on the retreat. And we brought this up in the past. I know he has lost to a high level of competition, and that has to be brought up. It's not like he's losing to guys just coming off Contender Series, but it's the way that he reacts to fighters who are approaching him and really moving forward heavily. He does have a tendency to leave that chin a little high, and he doesn't always leave the hands up too. And for those reasons, I think Mendonca is, no, he can't just rush in all haphazardly. He's going to be intelligent about it. But if he can set up some of his power strikes and get Maness up against the cage behind those two black lines, I think Mendonca can hit him with some big shots.
He's a Tapatio sees red type of guy, and the Boxing Prophet saying Tapatio's hella weak. I'm going to tell you something, Boxing Prophet. You're going to learn something unless you are a Canadian. You go down to the States, and just about every single restaurant, the Denny's of the world, and so on, there's always a bottle of hot sauce, a weak one, a vinegar-based sauce, as I said. But there's always a bottle. In Canada, it's not like that at all. So it would be weird if somebody had a bottle of Tapatio.
Why do you keep on saying vinegar-based? You can't just say hot sauce.
Yeah, but they're
I understand.
mild,
trust me.
And there's so much vinegar in them. But when you do look at this matchup, Matt, 67% of the fans at Fight Nate Picks going with Mendonca to get the win. For me, I like the 3-level attack. I like the odd angle punches, and I think that might be able to confuse Nate Maness a little bit. But we mentioned it at the start of the week, and I said it at the start of this breakdown. I'm a little bit more 50-50 than when I look at the odds, when I look at the fan vote. Because for Nate Maness, you look at the losses. Lapillus won it up in the UFC. That was a TKO title fight when he lost his belt. Before that, he beat Big Cat Jesse Arnett. You look at the wins that Maness has in the UFC. And then you look at Ulanbekov, who I don't love in the grand scheme of the flyweight division. And you look at a guy in Umar Nurmagomedov, too. Those are pretty tough fighters. So, again, Mendonca's got a good shot to right the wrong of losing to Javid Basharat. But where I saw Basharat, kind of struggle in the first round. I know one of the judges scored it for Mendonca in the first. Mendonca, the wheels kind of fell off a little bit round 2, round 3. And then that could be, even more so pronounced at 125 with the weight cut, too.
It definitely could be, but I do still have Mendonca as the pick.
All right, Matt. Both of us going with Mendonca in that one. Then we move into a fight where one of these two fighters was the only fighter on the card who had to weigh in with the hoop. And it was Karolina Kowalkiewicz coming in at 116. So Kowalkiewicz taking on Belbita. You know that one of these women was a former KSW champ. One of these women challenged for that belt after the fact. It was Belbita who ended up fighting against Ariane Lipski for the belt. Lipski ends up getting the win, and not soon after ends up into the UFC. For Belbita's got to build her way back up through the ranks. Ends up in the UFC. Has a loss too. I just mentioned 8-8 Ashley Yoder. She has a loss too, at the time, like 6-6 Gloria DePaula. A real UFC fight that happened. Kowalkiewicz, we know the story. She fought for the highest of the highs with Invicta. Had a UFC title fight after beating Rose Namajunas in a fight of the night. But, the Roses, they went away. And now they've come back. 3-fight win streak for Kowalkiewicz. Again, Kowalkiewicz, 10 years. Belbita is senior, so we'll see how this one plays out.
It has been a weird run for Kowalkiewicz, though, after a title shot. That's been the thing. Like, not only the long losing streak, the time off, the threatened retirements, like, there has been a lot of oh-by-the-ways throughout her career, and that's why I don't have her in this fight. Because for Karolina, I don't like the fact that I have Belbita, if I can be completely honest. Like, she is far from being a super complete fighter. I doubt she's going to be a title challenger anytime soon, but she is the much younger fighter who is much more in her prime, fighting somebody who's almost 40, well, I guess 37, but who is quite up there in age. She's been in a lot of difficult fights and had a lot of time off. And for Kowalkiewicz, I am happy that she's been able to get back on the winning track, but it has been against a lesser level of competition. It's not like she's still fighting Jessica Andrade and Joanna Jędrzejczyk anymore. So for Karolina, I think with her experience, it might be able to give her the edge to where, hey, she's going to be able to use the takedowns effectively, get into her clinch work, and have really good success with her own elbows. I could see that all happening. But I do think Belbita is going to be able to use her pace and at least land some shots up the middle to at least not allow Karolina to continue to collapse that distance.
Karolina's fought lesser fighters in the 3 wins. Diana Belbita beat Hannah Goldie and
No,
Maria Oliveira.
I don't mean compared to Belbita. I mean compared to when she was in her prime. Like, that's why I said you're not fighting Jessica Andrade and Joanna.
Oh, it's
Belbita
true.
never fought them.
Well, 59% of the fans going with Kowalkiewicz in the matchup. If we have a look at the odds, Kowalkiewicz is a slight favorite in this one. When you look at the height, I mean, Belbita has a decided advantage there.
She does.
About 4 inches. And when you look at the reach as well, she does have an advantage in that spot. We'll see if Belbita is able to kind of keep that distance, because we saw that in Belbita's fight when she was taking on Liana Jojua. Striking looked good at the start, and then she clinches up and goes for a takedown and gets herself submitted. So we'll see how the fight IQ plays out. But I will say this, Matt. I said it earlier on in the card, Montana De La Rosa, we haven't seen kind of much of a progression throughout her UFC career. For Belbita, when she's taken some time away, we've seen her get a little bit better in some of these fights. So I have liked that out of Belbita. That Canadian move, she was the first Canadian on UFC 289 to kick things off the giant Kanako win streak there in Vancouver. But I know we're splitting the pick on this one.
I just don't think Karolina's the fighter she used to be. And the fighter she is now still might be good enough to get the win in this matchup. I just would rather go with the fighter that I do think is making more improvements than going downhill.
Kyle G's tuning in from Harvey, New Brunswick.
Nice.
Go down to Black's tomorrow and get yourself a breakfast. Always very good when you're in Harvey. Matt, we move into the next matchup. I had Kowalkiewicz in that one, and as you said, you had Belbita.
What a weird fight.
We look at an odd fight. I like it. I mean,
It is fun,
you
but
know-
it's weird.
You know what this fight feels like? I mean, the PFL's like, yeah, we'll sign Derek Brunson. He can fight Ray Cooper III, and I'm down for it. But this feels like a PFL, what do they call them? Like a featured fight. It's not for the belt, and it's not for the tournament format, but this is a PFL fight they throw in the prelims. We have Felipe Lins taking on Iwan Kutsalaba. Matt Kutsalaba, look good on the scales. So that's good, because he was one of those guys at a point where I thought, is he like the next Pezao, Marco Sergio de Lima? Like, the weigh-ins, they were tough on old Iwan. Maybe he moves up to heavyweight, but he's got the flow now. You can't see it in that picture, but if we're just comparing hair for hair's sake, they both have pretty good hair for 205. It's not like they got the Charles Johnson, just like the little bit in the back. But Matt, Iwan Kutsalaba, we know him as being pretty well a first-round fighter, except for that fight against Devin Clark. And for Felipe Lins, as we said with Nate Maness earlier on in the card, Lins might drop a first round every now and again. He might get dropped in the first round like he did against Tanner Boser. But Lins, the last number of fights where he's been able to get out there on the winning end, he's had a really nice rally to him. He's able to out-pressure, out-volume his opponents, pushes his opponents behind that black line. And then once they're there, do I go for a takedown? Do I land some body shots? Do I clinch up? Do I work my boxing? Lins is really good at kind of outworking and outthinking a lot of his opponents at this stage of his career, to where at the start, you remember Felipe Lins with Bellator, before even his PFL run, where he became the champ, won the $1 million. Lins, when he was over with Bellator, he'd be kind of willing to bite down on the mouthpiece at the center of the octagon. And he was on the more winning end, I guess I should say, of the circle with Bellator. So it is a fun fight. Both these guys kind of just on the fringe of the top 15 here as well.
But it is very similar to a lot of the fights on this card, where it comes down to the steadiness of one fighter versus the larger actions of their opponent. For Kutsalaba, like, I don't care who he's fighting in the UFC, he's going to have a chance to knock them out. That's the kind of power he brings into the cage, and he brings the aggressiveness in with him, too. You bring up Derek Brunson, like, what's been the biggest difference between Derek Brunson when he was on that big win streak before he fought Robert Whittaker and the Derek Brunson of now? He still has big power, but he's not nearly the aggressive guy that he used to be. He used to charge a guy's chin first, just trying to hit you with a bigger shot before he was getting hit. Kutsalaba has, listen, he's been hit by big shots because of his aggressiveness, but he does still have that get up and go to him, and I think that's important, because if he ever does lose that aspect of his game to where, hey, he still has the power, but he's a little bit more on the back foot, well, that's when you completely erase the two things that really did make him special in the first place. And it's weird, because if he does throw all those big power shots and he's not able to get the knockout, I think at this point we really have seen the story. I know Devin Clark, he was able to get the win over, but he damaged Devin Clark to where Devin Clark wasn't the full version of himself.
When Devin Clark gets hit really hard, and again, you think of him like the bridge of his teeth all busted up, but when he gets hit, like even Murzakanov fights, the comparison.
That's my point. It's just for Kutsalaba,
he backs up and that's it.
Round 2 and 3, Devin Clark wasn't the same Devin Clark. Like, yes, he won that fight, but he wasn't fighting the same guy who was at a high level at that point. So my only point is, for Kutsalaba, I really do think this fight comes down to, and wow, I'm such a smart guy, it comes down to one round. Can he get it done? I think he can against this opponent. And I know you hate to pick the guy who kind of has to rely on the burst more than the steadier fighter, but Linz is somebody who can get hit clean. And it's one of those situations where, yes, Boser might be the bigger guy due to what division they were fighting in at the time, but if Cutelaba is able to hurt him in the first round, I think he's going to be able to get the finish after he's able to hurt him initially.
Well, and the question there from No Please was Linz a PFL champ? You bet your bottom dollar he was. In 2018, he was the heavyweight champ over there, so it's kind of wild. Took a lot of time off. He was due a fight with the PFL the next year against Satoshi Ishii, but the fight fell out, and then Linz ultimately ended up in the UFC fighting his teammate, Andrei Arlovsky. Lost that one by decision, and then he ended up getting knocked out by Boser in the first round his next time out. But Matt, when we do consider this matchup, again, we'll have a look at the fan vote at Fight Night Picks. You talk about a Cutelaba fight, and I referenced it at the start of the week, 57% of the fans going Cutelaba, but to the point, first round against Glover Teixeira, Cutelaba looked really good, and then second round, he definitely didn't. The biggest Cutelaba highlight, Luis
Jim Murata and Tigulov, who had been ranked.
But you think of the throat slash, and then he goes over and he gets the win. Old Cutelaba with his antics. So we're in agreement on that one, and that gets us set for the main card. Now, Linz Cutelaba at the start of the week was main card fight, and then they shuffled things around. Now you get Alexander Hernandez, second time's the charm, back at featherweight. Hernandez lost to Billy Q. Then he goes up to 155, beats Jim Miller, passes that test. Now he's back down to 145, taking on Bill Algeo. Now, listen, I'm not going to sell you snake oil. I'm 2-5 picking Bill Algeo fights since he's been inside of the UFC. You're 3-4. We're not good at picking Bill Algeo fights. You're better than me, but not good. Not good is not good.
When we look at above average, you know? If I got one more wrong, I'd be worse.
3-4.
I'm just
failings above average. Where are you?
3-4. I have more wins than losses, do I not?
3 wins and
Sorry,
4
oh my
losses.
goodness, sorry, I just realized what I'm arguing about.
Oh my
I thought you were
gosh.
saying 4-3 the whole time. Here's the only question I was thinking about, and that's why I kind of blanked there for a second. Bill Algeo, I do think, has the skill set similar to like a Billy Q, right? They're well-rounded. They can last very long into the fight. They can damage their opponent.
One
but
guy is
not...
takedown
no,
defense.
No, let me finish what I'm going to say. But Billy Q is definitely the better version of the two, right? He has the more in terms of not only defense, but he is the more aggressive fighter, too. Like, Billy Q is going to get after you from the early goings of the fight, even if you're not hurt. But I just don't know if Bill Algeo is going to be able to get past the threshold to, like, hurt a guy like Alexander Hernandez. And I don't like the weight cut at all, right? Like, moving down to 145 is not a career move that I think is intelligent for Alexander Hernandez. He has smarter guys in his corner than I am. So you know what? Like, I just thought that 3 wins is better than 4 losses. So I might not be the smartest guy in the world. My point is...
Matt,
this is the thing. Just let me finish, please. For Alexander Hernandez, we have seen him get hurt in the past. We've seen him get hit by big shots in the past. And I don't think his durability is going to be as good at 145 as it is at 155. It's not great at 155. But the thing about Bill Algeo is, does he have enough power to really start chipping away at Alexander Hernandez to be able to hurt him and maybe wobble him as this fight continues?
Tyler James with a big super chat.
Thank you, Tyler James.
Thanks for all the great coverage. I look forward to it every week and have been listening for years. Really excited for this card. Lots of great fights. I think Morono versus Buckley is going to be a fight of the night tied with the main event. I think those are good choices. I threw it out there earlier on this week, so now I'm going to bring it up because you hit up the super chat. You deserve this.
Thank you.
Everybody
Very
thank
kind.
Tyler James. If you can't hit up the super chat, you toss us a like. It would be much appreciated. I'll let it load and I'll go over to the YouTube community tab. But again, I threw it out there. Wanted to get a gauge. I think I put Pfeiffer, Al Hassan out there. Not a lot of people loving that one. There we go. So yeah. Almost 1,000 votes, 39% of the fans going Morono Buckley, 19% with Dober Glenn, 25% with Hernandez Algeo, 14% with Dawson and Green. So the fans, they're in agreement with you, Tyler James, and I think that's going to be a really good fight too. Matt, yeah, to bring back Conway Twitty, he had a song way back. It was the #1 hit called "It's Only Make Believe," and like a politician, if you want to make your math only make believe, then yeah, 3-4 is good. I do have a hard time with it. We'll see what the fans think on this fight. So at Fight Night Picks, it's close. 54% going with Algeo.
I just don't get it from a career move, right? Like, Alexander Hernandez is not a bad fighter at 155 by any means. He might not be the guy who was hyped up to beat Cowboy all way back when, but still, he is a good fighter who's quite young in his career, can make those improvements. So why keep on trying to move down to 145? Like, do you think, hey, Billy Q's one of the best fighters in the division, so hey, I might not be able to beat him, but I can still beat most guys? Because, no disrespect to Billy Q, there's a lot of good fighters at 145 that I think would beat Alexander Hernandez at this division, and I don't know if the size advantage that he does get by cutting down to 145 is equal to the durability he might lose in making that weight cut as well. Is that fair to say, you think?
Yeah, and I mean, Hernandez is a slight favorite in the matchup. Who do you have in this fight? At the start of the week, you both had Algeo.
And I still do. Again, I just don't like Alexander Hernandez at this weight cut. And maybe that's clouding my mind a little bit too much. I can open up with that and I can be very honest about it. It's just, I hate it when a fighter has that kind of tiptoeing between those two weight classes and not just being dedicated to one. Because let's say Hernandez did decide, I'm going to fight at 155. Let's gain a little bit more muscle perhaps, so I don't feel like I'm as small in the division. Maybe use my offensive wrestling a little bit more, so I'm not just moving around on the outside with my opponents nearly as much. I think it could be a really talented fighter at that division. I just think at 145, we're going to see him get hit by a shot. And I know Bill Algeo's not the biggest puncher. He's not the biggest striker by any means. But he does land clean shots up the middle that could deter Hernandez from being on those takedowns. So for those reasons, I do have Algeo. But I could understand why anyone's picking Hernandez in the matchup.
Bob Redneck. Oh, it's live, baby. Yeah, I mean, Bulls Bear. I don't know what your name is.
Well, we would have cut out that argument if we weren't live.
Yeah, I mean, geez, like 3 minus 4 is -1. I'll go with Bill Algeo and I'll keep the pick on him. But again, I do have a hard time. You watch Bill Algeo's last fight, it doesn't inspire confidence.
Exactly.
When he's taking on Hernandez. It was an uncredited knockdown in the first round for TJ Brown. Nice right hand. You remember at the end of the first round, that was my example of Deadliest Warrior because Bill Algeo's face was a crimson mask, as they'd say in WWE. And then in the second round, it was just a tidy little scramble out of a bad situation for Algeo. He gets into a man of crucifix. TJ Brown spins into a rear naked choke, and that's all she wrote. And even if you watch how Brown defended the takedown, or defended the choke, 2 hands quick, that's not good. And then he was trying to fight the hand, and he ended up getting the submission win. That was the submission win. As I said, for Bill Algeo. Free UFC bet picks argument just got here.
Oh, no, really.
Was it entertaining?
Should I
rewind?
alive for 5 seconds?
It was rough. It was rough. But we all have moments like that, Matt. Just like Rick Glenn. Rick Glenn, his last time out.
Now.
Kid got Yagosed. And we talked...
I like this fight a lot, though, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, I mean, because for Drew Dober...
It's an important fight for him.
The knockdown ratio, I mentioned it at the start of the week, and I'll have a look at my notes so I can get it right. Drew Dober's knockdown ratio in the UFC is... I think it's 8-1. It's 8-2. 8-2. So 8 knockdowns for to 2 against. But Dober in certain fights kind of has to get hit clean.
He does rely on his chin a little bit too much, and that is the detriment of people knowing you have a great chin. How do we know you have a great chin? Well, you've probably been hit by really clean shots in the past and somehow managed to not go down from them. And I think that fight after people start to have doubts is always one of the most important ones, right? Think of Joel Embiid going into this NBA season, for instance. Like, he won his MVP last year. They came up short in the playoffs. Now there's a lot of pressure on him, right? Because it always comes down to what happens after the fact. And for Dober, I think it is reasonable to bring up questions about his durability after the amount of big shots we've seen him get hit by, and after getting TKO'd by Matt Frivola his last time out. But that's why I think it is such an important fight for Drew Dober. It's, hey, can I go out there and have a good or impressive performance after the fact? Because if he can go out there against Rick Glenn, who I understand might not be the biggest name in this division, but he is a complete fighter who I think if you get a win over him, it does maybe not put you back into the conversation Drew Dober was. It's kind of like that borderline ranked fighter who could jump into any fight, but it puts him back on the winning track, and it might give him a little bit of that shine back.
Rick Glenn's last wins: Joaquim Silva in 2021, Dennis Bermudez by split decision in 2018. That was when Bermudez was on a split decision loss train.
He was.
Before that, wins over Gavin Tucker and Felipe Nover. Felipe Nover, the GSP of grappling at one point, some would say. Matt, I have Drew Dober in the matchup. I don't think that there's much needed to be said about this fight other than the fact that it is a strange booking. 93% of the fans at Fight Night Picks going with Dober. Sometimes you do have trap cards like this, but for me, I do like Dober in the matchup. No, please. Last win was Dawson. Come on. I mean, that was it. I really do. First round, 10-9 for Dawson. Second round, 10-9 Dawson. Third round, 10-8 Glenn. And listen, you go that way.
Some fights are draws.
It ends up in a draw. So you talked about guys having good chins, and how do we know they're good? Is if they have good chins. I think you're referencing like the early fight, but also this fight with Drew Dober. I listened to an interview that Chris Nyland did this week. He's got a new podcast out. He's got Raw Knuckles, and I've got a picture from his podcast over in the corner over there. If you get a sweater from him, he sends you an autographed picture too, and I think that's pretty cool. That was a Christmas gift from our dad last year. He got me a Chris Nyland sweater, and I love it. I really do, and I wear it a lot. But the point is, his first episode of Tough As They Come was with Irish Mickey Ward. And
Interesting.
Mickey Ward talked about, like, they went through his entire career and his losses, of which there were a lot of them, and then losses to get him into the fights against Arturo Gatti. And he touched on the fact about knowing that he could get back into the good graces and up into some of those pay-per-view fights because he had a good chin. He wasn't getting knocked out way back when. And then those 3 fights against Gatti took everything out of him. Like, everything.
As they would.
His eyes got so messed up that after it, he had to get surgery to correct it because his brain shifted, and he's a big component or proponent of talking about CTE and getting tested for it.
Yeah.
Mickey Ward, a legend.
You don't fight Arturo Gatti for like 3 hours and just be the same guy after.
No, it's wild. So if you do like Chris Nyland or Mickey Ward, go check out that podcast. I have Dober here.
But here's the thing. Can we just stop for 1 second? What does Dober do next? Like, does a win against Rick Glenn get him back into fighting guys who are in that rank conversation? Or does he probably need another win after this to really get himself back into that spot? Because Dober was on a good run for a little bit. I know he lost to Makhachev. Like, he would come up short against the real elite guys in the division. But anybody 10 to 15, and especially anybody outside the top 15, he was having good success against them.
And he was, and this feels like a get-right fight. We touched on it at the start of the week. Like, you know, once you're outside of the top 15, it's tough to gauge where you really are. But if
there's a lot of good fighters.
If you look right now on Topology, I'll click on the bout, because when you go from the bout and not, they've drew over 19th ranked lightweight worldwide, Rick Glenn, 72nd ranked guy. So it is an odd match.
Drew Dober to me feels like the Ryan Bader of the lightweight division. And I say that for this reason. He's probably not going to be champion of the lightweight division in the UFC. If Drew Dober went to like Bellator,
he wouldn't beat Usman or Magomedov.
But he put up good fights. You know, like if he went over there, I think he'd be one of their bigger names.
Yeah, like Sabah Homasi does.
He's better than Sabah Homasi. Sabah Homasi gets knocked out by the wind. Like Drew Dober, if he went to like any other organization, I think would oddly be a big star.
Shane Burgos.
Yeah, he'd be like a Shane Burgos level fighter. Shane Burgos gets decent levels of headlines when he fights.
OAM, who was able to beat Drew Dober. I don't know if I agree with you. But Matt, we'll move on to a fight that people are saying this is a fight of the night. Tyler James hit up the super chat, and we appreciate you. You look at this matchup, you have Alex Morono. Never count this guy out of a single fight. And this was the one where today I'm sitting around, I'm doing graphics for next week, and I'm thinking about fights, and I kept going back to this one. Alex Morono is one of the squirreliest fighters you can fight at 170 because what is he? Well, we build him up when he fought Anthony Pettis as, okay, they're both black belts in Taekwondo, they're both black belts in Jiu-Jitsu. How could that fight go? And for Alex Morono, it didn't go very well. So you could sell one bill of goods, but you could also sell Alex Morono as the guy that's fighting Santiago Ponzinibbio. It's going right, it's going not so right. That was a weird one. You look at Alex Morono's last time out, he's taking on Tim Means. Getting hit to the body. We talked about that. Means fight against Fialho that just happened last weekend. But when you look at a guy like Morono, what does he do? Well, it gets in tight. He pulls guillotine. He resets and he sits himself up. And Means can't get himself out of it. So Morono, again, there's moments in fights, and I'm talking snapshots, where maybe he struggles and that's why he ends up on the losing end. But by and large, Morono's a gritty vet. He's a very, very, fight IQ heavy guy to where it can cause him some issues, and he can freeze in some fights. And I think of Ponzinibbio's knockout. I think of the fight against Matt Semmelsberger in the 3rd round where Semmelsberger's losing the first 2 rounds handily, so he comes in with a flying knee and it drops Morono. Buckley can pick up on some of that. I'm eager to see again, what's Buckley going to look like round 2, round 3 at 170, because we didn't see that his last time out against Fialho.
He hits so incredibly hard, though.
Yeah, I'm eager to see this. Over in the comments section, Morono is going to walk him. Freevol and Glenn have very different power. That much is true. And I love Buckley. Morono loses. Dylan, you're out of the chat, bud. See you later. It was nice to know you. But Matt, who do you have in the matchup?
I agree with everything you said about Morono, but all those things do lead him up to just getting caught by one big clean shot from Buckley. Because if he does freeze up, especially with the backup against the cage, or even in the pocket, because Morono does throw an incredibly high level of volume if you allow him to really tee off on you. If you're one of those fighters who your defense is just to leave your hands up, he's not going to stop throwing if you don't respond with a big shot. But the thing about Buckley is I don't think he ever gets credit for it. Maybe he does a little bit more now. He does move his feet pretty well for being a big muscle-bound guy who throws big power shots in the feet. Normally you assume a guy built like him just going to march his way in and kind of be like that Paulo Costa type fighter, but he does do a good job of moving all the way out and all the way in. And I understand he gets caught by counter shots every now and then going straight down the pipe. I just don't know if Alex Morono has enough power to really cause that much damage going down the pipe. He normally is more of that death by 1,000 customer, of that volume-centered fighter. Not saying he couldn't get a stoppage. Like, Morono, if he hurts you, is going to throw a bunch of shots right behind it and finish you. He could do it even with a submission after he hurts Buckley, perhaps. I just don't know if he's going to be able to withstand a lot of the big power shots from a guy like Buckley. But, and you bring it up, I've never been happier to get a prediction wrong than I was to see Tim Means get that win last week.
And when it does come down to this one, I talked about it, on the Buckley side at the start of the week, and I said, okay, 122 of 356 significant strikes in these UFC fights have all been to the body. That's good for a third, or 34%, of Buckley's strikes have been body shots. And that can be...
Even with the hands, too, not just the kicks.
That can be a big thing in this matchup, especially stance for stance sake. When these two guys go at it, if they both open up in southpaw, it could be difficult for one of these two guys to figure it out. When you look at a guy in Buckley aiming a lot to the body with not just his boxing, but with his kicks, it opens up the head. And if he's able to back up Alex Morono, we've seen Morono be able to, like a JJ Aldrich earlier on in this card, still be able to throw a lot of volume when he's on his back foot, and it can open his game up a little bit. But for me, Morono's plan's got to be, don't be there for the receipt, and Buckley just continually kind of winging those power shots. But the one thing I worry about...
Chaos Williams.
Well, and I said this at the start of the week, Buckley has a very low accuracy power shot oriented game when it's on the feet, and that could be bad news against a guy like Morono.
It could be, but on the other hand, he does only need one. Like, I don't think he's going to win a volume fight, even if he did have average volume, because that's how good of a fighter Morono is with his style on the feet. So, for Buckley, just putting, maybe not everything into one shot, let's calm down a bit, but if he is able to start landing some of those power shots, especially to the body, I like his boxing going to the body. I think it's one of the more underrated aspects of his style, and I think he's going to be able to land against Morono, because he is the much heavier puncher. Like, if these guys do find themselves going 1-for-1 at any point throughout this matchup, you're going to heavily favor Buckley with the type of power he brings into the cage.
63% of the fans at Fight Night Picks going with Joaquin Buckley in the fight. So again, continue to let us know who you have here. And Goldman just trying to big dog the chat over there. You're watching our show and I'm not watching yours. So you enjoy it, and Goldman, for what it's worth. Matt, the co-main event of the evening, Joe Pyfer taking on Abdulrazak Alhassan, and I mention it with Joaquin Buckley taking on Alex Morono. I'll say the same thing for Abdulrazak Alhassan. I mean, you think of a guy that can mix it up to the body. This guy's hooks to the body are very, very good, and he's really able to mix it body, head, back up his opponent, and then that's it. And we saw it his last time out. It was his first second-round win of his career. It was 11 knockout wins, or 11 wins, but they were all by knockout, and all of them were in the first round. His last time, he showed us a wrinkle, and he's 38 right now, but I think going from Texas up to elevation has kind of changed some things for him. And when Abdulrazak Alhassan has that game plan of, I don't need to get this guy out right now, then maybe he could get a win against Joe Pyfer. But I do like Pyfer in the fight.
That's the thing. If he does find himself in the range to where, hey, he can land body shots with his own boxing, he is a little in danger, right? Like, that's where Joe Pyfer's going to have the most success with his own boxing game. He is incredibly heavy-handed. He lands great hooks to the head. Does a good job when he's able to get his combinations landing. Sometimes he will load up on that one big power shot. And if he does do that against a guy like Alhassan, maybe Alhassan can start landing good leg kicks to start at least slowing Joe Pyfer down and slowing down some of that forward movement. But this, to me, really does feel like a let's boost the profile of Joe Pyfer fight. And he said something Dana White probably didn't like, which was, hey, I'm not going to fight ranked fighters until my next contract, because he's on the Contender Series one right now. But if he is able to get the win over Alhassan, it really is going to set him up, because I do think Alhassan's been in enough high-profile fights at this stage of his career. People know him for being that really exciting, flashy fighter that, okay, if you beat him, you're not going to fight a ranked fighter next, but it's a good win that people can get behind. It's a good name to have on your resume. So I do have Joe Pyfer in this matchup, but Alhassan with the kicks should be able to make it interesting.
Yeah, and I mean, when you do consider it and you look at somebody like Abdulrazak Alhassan, the body work, the power, you can never count him out. And that's what makes this fight incredibly volatile for a guy like Pyfer, continuing his progression up through. I saw a couple of mentions out there about VT Raptors jersey. He's fire. I've been wearing my Tatum jersey this week. NBA right around the corner. Matt, my wife and I were looking, kind of moving up. Maybe we go to a main Celtics game. A main Celtics game. Because I've never been to the field house that they have in Portland. It looks really small. I remember going to a baseball game and walking and the doors were open. I think we walked through there once.
I think we did.
There is not much for seating in there. However, if Jordan Walsh doesn't make the Boston Celtics, I can't wait to see him play for the Maine Celtics. Man, Jordan Walsh, I like the cut of that guy's jib. And he's young, and he's hungry, and he plays really hard. So for me in this matchup, again, I do have Joe Pyfer. We're in agreement in this one. We'll move on to that main event. But yeah, the NBA season coming up. We'll see if some of those fringe guys make it. Matt, the main event of the evening, over there in the chat, 77% going with Grant Dawson to get the win. That's a big fight right there. Big fight.
It is a big fight, and it's an important one, too.
It is.
The weird thing about this matchup is, though, I don't know what Grant Dawson does next if he doesn't have an insanely impressive performance. Because let's say he goes out there and finishes Bobby Green in the first, second round, right? Gets a submission win, maybe a head and arm choke, looks incredibly dominant. Then okay, you can build off that. There's enough great fighters at 155 to where you could probably throw him into, like, I don't know, a main card pay-per-view matchup maybe. You know, one of those more high-profile fights. But the thing is, if he does win this fight and we see more of those flaws start to shine through, like we'd seen in the Glenn fight, like we even saw in the Santos fight before he was able to get that knockout with some of those insane back fists near the end of it, then I don't know if you do keep on giving him these like ranked fighters. If you do sort of not restart the Grant Dawson project, but maybe go outside the top 15 again, go to recognizable names, maybe bring Brad Riddell back, you know, like go for guys who have higher profiles but might not be the biggest threats to him, just because he is in that weird spot right now to where you have that real steady top 10 at 155 that's sort of set, you know, they
which
kind of
includes Grant Dawson though.
It does, but he hasn't fought those names yet, that's all. You have those steady, let's say top 8, then my bad, who just sort of fight each other, and they never really kick each other out of that space. So for Dawson, if he isn't going out there and looking really impressive, it's going to be hard for him to really break through. Unless he wants to fight like Hanato Moicano next. That's a dangerous fight for anybody. So I just think for Dawson, it's not just enough to go out there and win. He almost has to go out there and win and look impressive on top of that. Because let's say Green is able to tag him on the feet a little bit, gets taken down some, and it's a close decision by the end of it. Well, there's a lot of fighters at 155 who could definitely replicate a game plan that Bobby Green's able to. Think of like a Poirier or a Chandler or a Gaethje. So for Dawson, I think he does have to go out there and do a little bit extra. And you hate to say that, right? A win should just be enough. But he is in a weird spot where it's almost like you're in the Grant Dawson spot in the division. You're better than a lot of the prospects because you have been able to break through and show how good you are. But you're still not proven enough to go out there and fight those high-level vets.
I mean, no disrespect if Grant Dawson were to hear this, but you're in the Grant Dawson zone. So for
he's Bobby Portis. He's like one of the best bench players, but you can't really start him. You know, he's just stuck there.
He's 21-1. That's his record.
I know. He had a draw against Rick Glenn.
He has a squeaky clean record. However, you're main eventing a card in front of 10 people. So it is, the Grant Dawson zone. It's not the greatest. 29-year-old potential title contender versus a 37-year-old veteran with miles. Grant Dawson.
That's putting a high ceiling on Grant Dawson.
If Grant Dawson fought Islam Makhachev, it's going. It's like that old what's that band called with Pete Wentz? What are they called?
I have no idea. I'm just like,
Sugar, we're going down swinging. He's not winning that.
What if, like, Max Holloway moves up to 155? You know, what if Volkanovski does? Those are just more guys who are getting in the way of Grant Dawson. Because I hate to tell you, I don't think Grant Dawson would beat Max Holloway in a fight. Sorry, I don't know if that's a hot take or not. So for Dawson, again, I do think he's going to have to go out there and maybe even get a finish if he doesn't go, like, a 50-40 fight and he's so dominant. And for Bobby Green, I think we did establish how he's able to win this fight at the start of the week. If he can defend a lot of those early takedowns and just make Grant Dawson work, even if he does get taken down early in this fight, but makes Grant Dawson work and really be heavy on top and try to use a lot of his energy establishing that top spot, then Bobby Green might be able to pull away in that third, fourth, and fifth rounds that goes down the stretch.
I mean, Bobby Green has 2 fights against Lando Venata. They're both fight of the nights. And if you watch what he was able to do his last time out back in 2020, I mean, he beat Clay Guida defending takedowns and utilizing his boxing. He did the same thing against Lando Venata the next time out. Even if Bobby Green gets backed up behind the black line, we know he has good jiu-jitsu. How do we know? Well, we saw it his last time out. It surprised Joe Rogan and some of us. It even surprised me. I don't care if Bobby Green has 9 wins by submission at this point. It's still surprising to see him submit Tony Ferguson, who's going to fight Paddy Pimblett. How excited are you for that fight?
I'm so sad.
That's weird.
Why don't... nobody has a happy ending in this sport. Nobody.
VT, is Lando even around anymore? Yeah, like when he fought Daniel Zellhuber. Is he Carl Havoc?
I don't want to be here. In the suit? No. Wait, you mean alive?
Yeah.
Yeah.
How many people are dressing up like Carl Havoc at the end of this month for Halloween? Too many. Too many.
I hope.
So, Matt, I do have Grant Dawson in the matchup.
But you do agree with my point.
Yeah.
Like, he has to go out there and look impressive because Bobby Green is just a well-established vet, right? Like, nobody looks at Bobby Green at this stage of his career and thinks, wow, he's going to go out there and beat a lot of guys in the top 10. So you have to go out there and really put it on him to really deserve one of those fighters because Fiziv's coming back off a knee injury at some point, right? Like, he's going to need a dance partner. There are a lot of good fighters at this division who do need a fight. Maybe a Beneil Dariush fight, but even to me, I got to be honest, I know Beneil didn't look great against Charles Oliveira, who is an all-time great, arguably. But, like, I don't know if I'd favor Grant Dawson in that fight. You know, like, Beneil's pretty good at most aspects of MMA. So, Grant Dawson, unless he goes out there, maybe he hurts Bobby Green on the feet and then chokes him out. That'd be really impressive. So, I have Dawson in the fight.
Both of us with Dawson. And then, as you know, it's not fight night picks if we don't do question mark kicks. And stack that deck once more. First fight on the card, Montana De La Rosa taking on JJ Aldrich. I'll go with De La Rosa.
Give me JJ.
Yeah, I bet you JJ wins.
That's
Matt.
the thing, like, unranked opening card fights where women are involved, the underdogs tend to hit in a lot of those.
Aoriqileng taking on Johnny Munoz Jr. Matt switching the pick. I have Aoriqileng here.
So do I.
Yeah,
Don't love it, though. It's a very close fight because both guys have a decent amount of weaknesses. I think that's fair to say.
Demopoulos taking on Murata. I have Murata in the matchup. Her teammate Mizuki had a really long layoff too. Fought last weekend. Got a finish win. So, not just because of that, but I do have Murata in the fight.
I also got Murata.
All right, then we have the next one, Matt. Maness taking on Mendonca. This feels like the biggest trap card on the entire week. I'm split, and I'm still split right now. I'm going to go with Mendonca, but I don't love it at all.
I would bet on this fight because the odds are way out of whack. Like, they don't make sense whatsoever because Mendonca hasn't really proven it, right? I'm a firm believer and you have to justify your odds. We'll see this every now and then, right? You have two fighters in the prelims who are both like 1-3 in their last 4, and one of them will be like a minus 400 favorite. What have they done to justify those odds? And for Mendonca, I think he is a talented fighter, but we have seen some hitches in his game to where I just don't know if those odds are justified at this stage. Basharat's not a bad fighter by any means, so losing that in your UFC debut, maybe he can go on and really be able to recreate himself. Like, listen, we bring up Max Holloway. He lost to Dennis Bermudez, guys. Dennis Bermudez. And Max Holloway is one of the greatest fighters of all time. So you can get it back together, and I do think Mendonca will be able to get some wins.
Bermudez almost beat the Korean Zombie until
He hit him with one good shot, and then he got one of the dirtiest uppercuts of all time.
Kowalkiewicz taking on Diana Belbita. I'll go with that scrappy Polish gal. Give me Karolina Kowalkiewicz.
I'll go with Belbita. I don't love the pick by any means because I don't project the highest ceiling on her, if I'm being completely honest. She does have room to grow in her game without a doubt. She has shown improvements throughout her UFC tenure, but this would be by far the biggest name on her resume without a doubt. And I'm a little bit worried that it might jump her into the deep end of the pool a little bit too soon, right? Because if you fight Karolina, well, you can't really go back to fighting the Hannah Goldies of the world, right? Like, you're only going to be fighting people who are very recognizable names, who have been around in the top 15 for a while. So this might be one of those fights where a win could be the worst case scenario. Fighters who were in the top 15 for a while. I don't mean they are currently. Like, Felice Harry's a name. I think she might have retired, but you know what I mean? Fighters of that ilk who are probably on their way out, who have that big name still. The UFC is going to use those fighters to try to prop her up. I have Belbita, but I could see her losing this and having Karolina have one of those y'all must have forgot type fights.
Hit Virgil Hill with a body shot. Yeah, I have Kowalkiewicz. Matt, the next matchup. Lynn's taking on Kutsalaba, going with Kutsalaba.
I think he's going to get the knockout.
Then we have Hernandez taking on Algeo. I mean, you can't get worse than 2-5. You get 2-6, I guess.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm bad at picking Bill Algeo fights. I'll go Algeo in this fight, but again, his last fight does not inspire confidence.
It is one of those matchups, though, where both guys' strengths, if they're able to just fight based off their strengths, kind of play into their opponent's weaknesses. So that's why it should be a really fun matchup. I hope we get like 7.5 minutes on the feet and 7.5 on the mat, just because I think it's going to be a really fun fight, depending on where it is split. But I do have Bill Algeo. I think his cardio is going to be a little bit better.
Well, the thing that I don't like is I think Hernandez can kind of hang around if it's in the striking. I think Algeo loses in the grappling in this fight. I do.
That's a good point on it. Because Algeo might have a hard time off his back trying to get Hernandez off of him. But on the flip side of that, if Hernandez is using a lot of energy to keep that position, I don't know if he's going to have the same lasting power at 145. So it's a really interesting fight in both careers.
3-4 is good. Both of us going with Algeo. Drew Dober's taking on Rick Glenn. Going with Drew Dober here.
I've also got Drew Dober. It really is a what happens next kind of fight, though.
What happens next? What will happen is Alex Morono will walk in and he'll fight Joaquin Buckley. And I bet you Alex Morono walks out too. He strikes me as a Tom Petty, but you can't go with the Chris Weidman, well, I won't back down. So you got to pick another song. What song would you pick if you had to pick a Tom Petty song? into the great wide open.
I don't know Tom Petty as well as some might.
And
hope
had
so.
a roadie named Bart. No?
I go with Keith Buckley in this fight. I
The
just want that to
sky
end sooner rather than later.
Was the limit. All right. Joe Piper's taking on Abdul Razak Al Hassan. I have Joe Piper.
I've got Joe Piper.
And then in the main event.
Okay, here is my question though. Do you think the UFC tries to get Joe Piper to fight a ranked opponent next? Or does he fight like Brad Tavares? Like, what does he do? Because I feel like the UFC wants to push him in that level of, hey, maybe not fight ranked fighters next, but let's fast track him sooner rather than later. I don't really know who is between that Gerald Mearshart, Abdul Razak Al Hassan, and like a Brad Tavares. Like, there's a gap there. I just don't know how many fighters are within that gap. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'd have to have a look at the rankings and who doesn't have fights in the next coming bit to try and play matchmakers. That's a tough one off top of my head. But
Brad Tavares.
I'll move into the main event. Matt Dawson taking on Green. I have Grant Dawson in the matchup to get the win. American Top Team against Pinnacle MMA. Redwood MMA out of California. Regardless, that is Bobby Green. But for me, I'm going with Dawson in the main event.
Bobby Green's going to make this fight a really exciting fight no matter what. Like, even if he loses in the first round, remember when he got knocked out by Dustin Poirier and he's, like, talking crap to him the whole entire time, even though he's getting hit by huge shots? Like, Green is an exciting fighter to watch fight. Like, I like watching Bobby Green compete. But I think Grant Dawson has a lot of stylistic nightmares for him in his game. He's really heavy in that top position. Even if Green does have a really good number with his takedown defense, if he's able to defend, 8 of 9, that one takedown from Grant Dawson might be heavy enough to hold on to that spot for the whole round. And that should be enough for him to be able to win a lot of those rounds because he does do a really good job of opening up submissions with his own ground and pound. And I could see that being a path to victory for him.
Or we end up with Mackenzie Dern versus Marino Rodriguez. You worry in the second round. But other than that, it's all Striker's Paradise. Some big time fights in this card, Matt. Next weekend, it's another Apex show, and I'll turn down the music on it.
Event, though.
Yeah, Sadiq Youssef taking on Edson Barboza. It's a showcase. It's an Ashley Yoder fight card, Matt, at 8-8. But
and I feel like next weekend's main event is very similar to this one, right? You have Edson Barboza, who's a very well-known commodity at this stage of his career. One of the more popular fighters to never really be in that title picture. Like, he was top 5 at lightweight for what felt like years. And at 145, he's had a good level of success, too. But for Sadiq Youssef, we all know how skilled he can be. And on his best night, he is as good as anybody. But it's always been, can he match the cardio with the accuracy, with the takedown defense, with the punching power? And if you're able to beat Edson Barboza, you're only going to fight other headline type of fighters after that. Maybe a Yair Rodriguez coming off a big loss in a championship fight. Brian Ortega's going to need a dance partner here too. So I think that's a fight that could set both guys up for a big matchup next time around.
Winner probably gets Bryce Mitchell or Dan Ige, I bet you. Matt, some big time fights on this card. That one as well. Make sure you toss a like on your way out. The fights, they are on their way. So keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, as we always say.
Let's get into it.